This project that Marcia and I are going to talk to you about today is an ALTC funded project, funded for 18 months. We're due to complete in August. The focus is very much, it's a success focus. We're looking at what works with the idea of promoting effective learning and teaching among students from low socioeconomic status backgrounds. And Deakin's leading the project in collaboration with QUT and Charles Sturt University. So Marcia Devlin, project leader, who's just leaving the building now, is supposedly going to talk to you soon about preliminary findings of the project, so I hope she's not exiting. We also have our research fellow, Jade McKay, who's here. Jade, could you just raise your hand, identify yourself? And then, of course, the other team members who aren't here, probably known to many of you, Professor Sally Kidd, Professor Karen Nelson from QUT, and Liz Smith from Charles Sturt University. This is a great project to work on for lots of reasons, but one is the idea of being very success-focused and oriented. So the students who are part of this project who've been identified as successful in terms of this study, that's because they have successfully completed and passed at least 1 year of university study. And it's focused on good practice. So through various ways and means that I'll go into a bit more detail of,
I think the bank is wrong, so don't.
No, I know. I was wondering if it was one of those reverse clocks. Time is going backwards since I started talking. So we're looking at what works from the student perspective, and then also garnering a repository of good practice and building on both to develop some resources for the sector. The deliverables that come out of this project, these are sort of 5 core ones. The first, the conceptual framework, bridging socio-cultural incongruity, will be published in Studies in Higher Education in 2014, but I think it's available online. It's certainly available for those who are interested on the project website, which is www.lowses.edu.au, and that will flash up again in the slide to come. Then for the 4 core deliverables in terms of resources for the sector, they cover a range of different levels. So there's advice for policymakers and teaching and learning leaders. These are all currently being developed. Practical guidelines for academic staff, and practical being the key word there. Materials to support professional development, which will really pull the key points out of those 2 elements. And a repository of effective policy programs and practices. One of the key elements of the study has been an environmental scan, and in fact there's a sign-up sheet at the table just down the back there, because all along we've been going to colleagues in the sector to find out what they're doing, what's working, and gathering examples of good practice into a repository that is very much a work in progress, and again is available on the project website. So for those who are interested in sharing what they do more broadly, you might like to pop your name down on the list, and we'll be in touch to discuss that further. In keeping with that, continuous dissemination has very much been the approach of the study. So as I just said, we're trying to involve as many leaders, staff and institutions in data generation in the project as we can. So I've already mentioned the National Environmental Scan, and that's been done in multiple ways, through contacts, through workshops, where there have been a couple of conference workshops where people have provided examples of what they do, or agreed to give more information to follow up. I've talked about the website lots already, but you can now you've actually got the URL, you don't have to rely on recall. That's where we've put a lot of material, so as we're developing resources and things in the project, that's where you'll find them, including the article that I mentioned, which encapsulates the conceptual framework for the project. Jade McKay, the research fellow, has produced an annotated bibliography, which kind of puts together the key material arising from the literature review. A lot of media articles, a discussion paper which Jade and Marcia developed together, and there are hard copies of that, I believe, up on the table at the back there, so please help yourselves and take those. And I think that can also be found on the website if you want to disseminate it beyond these walls. There's a forthcoming book chapter, several journal articles, and then conference presentations and so forth. Oh, that'll be interesting to see what happens. Where will we go?
No.
Well, I was going to say, well, maybe try it at home. But
There you go.
yeah, so as you can see, there are a number of different aspects there, and there are also contact details for the project team too. So if you have any thoughts or reflections and you want to make contact with any members of the team after today, the contact details are in here as well.
So now, I guess we have that. Yes, there. Who says I can't do technology?
I just hope I can live up to those math standards when it's my turn, which is coming up very soon, so fingers crossed. Methodology for the project. As I mentioned, we've had a range of different sources in the data collection phase. The literature review, which culminated in the annotated bibliography that I've already talked about. Interviews with 89 students in the 3 institutions involved in the project, so QUT, Charles Sturt and Deakin. Low socioeconomic status in the project. Initially the students were recruited via home postcode, and then they were asked to indicate whether they had a parent who had attended university, and if they answered no to that question, then they were eligible to be part of the study. And as I mentioned, they also were students who had successfully completed at least 1 year of tertiary study. We also had interviews with 26 academic staff, some teaching, some were in academic support areas, not only from the 3 institutions, but from universities around Australia, and they were identified in a range of ways through contacts that different members had, sort of snowball sampling, but also through the environmental scan. And then I feel like I've said environmental scan lots of times, but it has been a really critical and continues to be a critical element in terms of generating data in this study. For the data analysis, the student...
What is an environmental scan?
Basically looking around to see what has already been done in a number of ways. So we worked through, as I said, we had workshops, so we actually got people to come and tell us. We looked at websites, personal contacts.
We
Any
used
other
new people
sources?
who were doing good
Yeah.
things, and so just scanning the environment
Yeah.
to see what's going on.
What's
And then
being
across
done?
Australia.
Yeah.
Across Australia and New Zealand now as well. We just had some interest in
Yeah.
there. We thought there's no reason to exclude that. So
Which is, I guess, why conferences have been really key in that. But then we
feel
thought that...
excluded enough normally.
what's that?
Well, we were excited when we could go international and have New Zealand.
Aren't we the state of Australia?
Well, you were quoting some statistics earlier about population, I think. Would have been compelling. So with the data analysis, the first step was coding in vivo, and the coding was done by Jade McKay, the research fellow, with some contribution from me and Marcia leading it. Following that, themes emerged. There was thematic analysis, and that also, we did intercoding kind of validation and reliability checks throughout, as other members of the team were also involved in that process. Jade's also looked at frequency analysis in terms of some of the data that's emerging as well. And from the data, well, we coded up from the data, but we also drew on principles that are guiding, I guess, the thinking about the study, and these are those 5 principles. Initially they were derived from the literature review, but then, as I said, they were honed through the process of data coding and analysis, and they're what we are now working with as a framework for the study. And I will now hand over to Marcia, who's going to share some of the preliminary findings that have come out so far.
Thank you very much, Juliana. I'm shaking my head there with Juliana said I was leading the data coding. I wasn't. Jane came in every day and asked me a question, and I answered it, and just I that's fantastic, and left again. But 89 student interviews and 26 staff interviews. They were very detailed discussions. I was peripherally involved. Thank you for that leadership role you hoisted on me. So some of the findings and these we've just picked a couple because we had a short session today to talk to you of some of the most prominent, but these aren't in hierarchical order and these aren't necessarily all the findings certainly. We just thought we'd pick a couple in relation to teaching. We're looking at teaching and support more broadly. And for those of you who are academics who are teaching in the room, don't become alarmed. We're very conscious in this project that we don't provide advice that says teachers need to do more, full stop. Teachers do need to do more, unfortunately, but we're very conscious about putting a whole lot of other things around that in terms of institutional support and what students need to do as well. So, in summary, some of the major findings were those that are up there. Teachers to facilitate the success of low SES students were reported by students. So first of all, just talk about the student data. To be helpful and explain things well. Up on the back table, can you pass me the top one there? Up on the back table is a little guide we wrote from an earlier study. We did just a small study at Deakin University in 2010. And it's called Teaching Students from Low Socioeconomic Status Backgrounds, a brief guide for university teaching staff. And it basically says, be helpful, be nice to students, explain things properly, speak in English, and assess appropriately. It's very, very basic, effective teaching advice, but it's come from the research. So we feel very confident going out to people saying, it's worth putting the effort in to do these things because this is what the students tell us helps them to be successful. That was the question we asked them. You're a successful student, what has helped you? And I'll give you some examples of just one quick example of each of those. And then also these teachers used assessment well, and we all know assessment drives student learning, so that's not a surprise, and used interactive teaching and learning. So the illustrative quotes, perhaps we go to the first one, Juliana, will help explain this. I'm not going to read it out. Here's an example of something coded as helpful. Pretty straightforward. But it really comes to life, we find, when you read the quotes. Of course all teachers should be helpful, but teachers understand helpfulness to mean different things. Well, I turn up and I lecture, that's quite helpful, but you could perhaps go a little bit further than that. Okay, the next one please. Explains things well. So that, in layman's terms, is a layperson's terms, to be non-sexist, like the student was, is speak English, not academic ease. That's a mistake I think all of us make. When we speak to each other, we like to show each other how terribly clever we are and lots of big words that we know and long sentences that we put together, and I can speak in a whole paragraph without taking a breath, but students don't find that very elucidating. Is that the right word? It's a big word. I just thought I'd say that to sound clever. Okay, assessment done well. So I've done a whole national study on assessment, and that paragraph pretty much sums up what it took us $300,000 in 12 months to find out. Tell them what you want them to do, explain how to do it, and do it at the beginning of the year, not just before the assignments due, and show them some examples and tell them how you're going to market. I mean, it's just kind of all the basics of good practice assessment. But from the horse's mouth, very powerful. And finally, just for today, not finally for the project, we've got a little card of return in there that's a bonus. The last bit I think is particularly moving. When you read some of the quotes from the students, there are perceptions around about students from low SES backgrounds. They're not very motivated, they're not very bright, they didn't do very well at school, and they don't really talk in class, they're not engaged. Some of the students are sitting there desperate to engage, or they are engaged intellectually, but they don't know the rules of how to interrupt and how to ask questions. They don't feel comfortable. Everybody's using big words, everybody's clever, and then what is this new place and this new space that I'm in? And where the teaching and learning is more interactive, they feel much more comfortable and they can engage and they can obviously improve their learning through doing that. With the staff, we're a little bit further behind with the analysis of the staff. We did the students first and we're just completing the staff data analysis. So we just pulled a couple of things out there. We don't have illustrative quotes for you today, but some of the things that came across really strongly in that analysis. The respect for and valuing of low SES students is central. And it was very clear from the staff interviews, it wasn't a matter of tolerating or accommodating these students. It was actually a profound respect for what these students can bring to the educational experience for everyone, including the other students and the staff. So it's quite a different way of thinking about allowing them in and letting them come. It was that this is actually of benefit to everybody to have these students in the room and have the benefit of their life experience and their different ways of seeing things to perhaps more traditional students, etc. But very profound, genuine, deep felt respect for these students. So we'll pick some juicy quotes that really bring that out. Knowing the makeup of your student cohort came up again and again and again. In fact, it was one of the most frequent things that staff said. Know who your students are, don't make assumptions about them. Ask or find out in some other way who they are, where they're from, what their background is, so you know who you're teaching. Very difficult to do in large classes, we acknowledge, but that's certainly what the teachers who do it well said. The big one, this is the one that's not going to be popular with the senior people in universities, is time and workload. These teachers, almost without exception, well, there were exceptions of course, but many of them said that this sort of teaching takes more time and it's got a greater workload, and I see Phil's nodding, having done this sort of teaching and being experienced in it. They weren't complaining, they were just noting. And we're very, very focused on success, as Juliana said, but we ask quite leading questions about what works. We don't ask about the problems or the obstacles in either case, for the students or the staff, for quite deliberate reasons. There's lots of research being done and will continue to be done about what the problems and the obstacles are. That doesn't really help you very much toward getting towards solutions. So we were deliberately very solution focused in this. Despite that, people talked about time and work all the time. We didn't ask about it, we never asked follow-up questions about it, but it came up again and again and again. And that is just a fact. So it's an interesting space that we're in higher education in Australia now, with more students, not more staff for the moment, more students from low SES and other diverse backgrounds. So what's going to happen? Is staff have to work longer or harder? Is that the answer? And that's a bit typical, no one really wants to talk about it, but we're going to have to. And finally not finally, but the four we just picked for today to mention were assessment. Staff who teach these students well, who are successful in doing so, understand the centrality of assessment. It's what drives the student learning, it's where they direct their energy, it's where they direct their attention, and they use assessment well, staging it, giving formative feedback, etc. All the things you would expect with good assessment. And that's it. We're at the environmental scan, which you might have mentioned once or twice before today. We really are very interested. Some of you are members of HERDS that might also be seeing that we're mentioning it there every week at the moment. We have some data in our environmental scan about what works and where good practice is, but we would really like to have more. So if you're interested or you know somebody or you yourself are working, we're not looking for people who are specifically working only with students from low SES backgrounds. We recognise that all classes are diverse, but we are looking for where there's a concentration of students from low SES backgrounds. So for example, QUT is one of our partners in this project. They have a campus where in particular there's a high proportion of low SES students. So the interviews that we did there were with staff on that campus. But there are non-low SES students in the class, and there are international students, and there are all kinds of students. It's a matter of finding good practice that I don't want to use the word accommodates, that includes, is inclusive of low SES students, and where the teachers are mindfully and reflectively working with those students in successful ways. And you can contact Juliana. We also have a Friends of the Project mailing list if you're interested in joining that and having updates on the project. There's a sign-up sheet at the back, is that right? Yeah. Good. And then this thing I waved around, there are copies of that at the back as well. That's from the earlier study, but that might be of interest. And there's copies of the discussion paper as well. So I thought I might stop there and see if anyone's got any questions or comments about the project. We're very interested in hearing. We've actually changed things as we've gone along based on the feedback we've had. So any comments or suggestions? Well, yes.
I'm interested to know how you chose your partner universities.
I'm friends with Sally, and she's friends with Liz. And we're all friends with lots of people. QUT had the campus, the campus. CSU, lower CS students are kind of bread and butter there, and Sally and I were both at CSU giving keynotes and workshops, and so we got into a conversation with Liz. That's how it came about.
Can I just make a follow-up comment? What's fascinating to me is somebody coming from outside the system, where the group of 8 universities like to take the lead on everything. They've been very quiet on social equity issues. Surprising.
I don't have to say anything. I'm usually the one bashing MU-OLT, but because this is a Monash hosted session, I have to
And it's quite shameful that the group of 8 universities
no, I don't agree with that. The group of 8 are going to accommodate lower CS students at postgraduate level after we fix them. That's not others. Lorraine.
It's perhaps a comment more than a question, but the 4 factors you put up, I would find that would be relevant to all students, not low socioeconomic students necessarily. And in fact, there was almost an assumption there that if you were from a low socioeconomic background, you were academically limited or not as talented. And I don't think that's the case either.
Yeah.
So
The assumption, and I don't mean to be rude to you, is in your head, because this is what the students told us helped. And yes, you're absolutely right, this is about effective teaching. But I get asked a lot, what do we do with these low SES students, how do we teach them? And the answer is you just do good teaching. It is a little bit more than that. I mean, it is a little bit, it's nuanced, a little bit subtle. And the idea of bringing in their experience and bringing them into as co-creators of the curriculum, which frightens people outside this room who don't understand what those terms mean. You have to be very careful about getting that across. But this is what the students told us. When we said to them, you've been very successful, how did that happen, what helped? These are the things they told us helped. So it's not, and you're right, they do help all students, but we only ask the low SES students. If we ask the other students, they would say the same thing. But this project is about giving advice on how to teach these students. There's more of them there. People are a little bit frightened, which is kind of good. A little bit of anxiety is good, gets the performance going. People are interested in what do I need to do. So this is about trying to explain to them. If you said just teach well, everyone's well, I do that anyway. I'm fabulous.
So in fact, drawing these out for the low socioeconomic students may in fact improve teaching overall.
Take out the may. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the low SES students aren't in separate classes,
Yes.
thank God. So if you improve your teaching and do these sorts of things, and we have a top 15 or 20 tips for teaching from both staff and students, it will improve teaching and learning for everybody. Yes, I saw a couple of days.
Just following on from that, really, I have a lot of English as a second language students, internationals, and it's almost identical.
It is.
Except they tend to pay a lot of money and a little bit more demanding.
That's okay.
But it's identical.
Yes, and other groups of students as well. Do you have a question?
I was just wondering if you got a sense of responses that are cut for large class responses or,
No. We didn't ask about the circumstances because many of them would be in large classes and small classes and so forth. It was just from their experience as an individual. Yeah. And it was random in that we didn't take note of courses they were in or subjects or disciplines. It's just...
Or even mode.
No, because many of them studying off campus, especially at CSU and Deakin, we have lots of off-campus students. Age wasn't a factor either. It was just, are you in the first generation to go to university? Are you from a low SES postcode? And I know that's problematic. And have you been successful? i.e. you survived first year? Simone and then John.
I was going to say thank you for a very interesting presentation. It was particularly interesting to me because we ran a program at Swinburne last year about teaching students how to learn, and it was particularly targeted to low SES students. I didn't like doing it, so picking out certain groups and identifying them, so we opened it up. Some of them were targeted a little bit, but it was opened up more broadly. And what we found is all the students were saying the same sort of things, no matter which socioeconomic status group they were from. They all said the same things. And the group that was particularly targeted was saying, particularly afterwards, we're so happy to find out we're the same as all these other students. You know, we're all the same. You know, all the students, we're all the same.
Same species.
You can see why you get the same sort of responses to that. So it's nice to know that you're interesting research.
Look, it is an interesting point though about separating them out.
I was not comfortable doing that.
Yeah, and none of us are. Well, when we did the study at Deakin, we produced 2 guides, one for teachers and one for students. And the teachers, we deliberately called teaching low SES students. Everybody was going, oh my God, what are you going to do? And we kept saying, they're not on another planet, it's all right. Look, I'm one, I'm quite normal, I've got two arms and legs, you know. But with the students, we've at first called it a guide for students from low socioeconomic background. We're working in collaboration with the library and with the Division of Student Life to integrate some practical advice and support and where to go and so forth. And I can't remember whether it was the library or Student Life. One of them said, do you think we should put the low SES on there? And I was like, no, I was a bit uncomfortable as well, just because that was what the funding was for. Anyway, we agreed to take it off, and it's just advice for new students. And now it goes out to all new Deakin students. Because it's actually just good advice for how to survive. And it says things like, go to class, do the reading, but the students are saying, it's not us telling you, it's the students who've been successful say these are the things you should do. How about taking some notes? John? Brian, sorry.
It's interesting because if you'd have done this study in England many years ago, I probably would have been in your sample.
Yes.
I was the first generation, several generations to go to university. The thing that interests me about the quotes was that nobody mentioned that they got inspiration from teachers who were themselves originally from a low SES background. Now, when I went to university, that was the thing that kept me going, was to see people from other working class, what was working class backgrounds, actually in positions of sort of academic authority in those days. The lecturers were like God when I was at university.
How things have changed.
Did anybody say anything like that?
No, but look, we asked them leading questions. It was a funny sort of interview. The first interview Jade did, I was actually overseas on leave, and I hope you don't mind me telling the story, Jade. It went for 8 minutes, and Jade sort of, we have follow-up prompts. We use a solution focus, which Brian and I were discussing, framework, so it was very much what else, and students said, no, that's all. So what helped you? And they said 3 things, and what else, and what else, and what else, nothing. And so the interview was over in 8 minutes, and Jade went into the person who was acting my role and said, oh, what do I do? I don't know, I'll have to email Marcia. And I got sent a text message, go to your email, I say, oh my God, what's happened? The building's burnt down. The interview only went for 8 minutes. Is that okay? Yeah, it's okay. It's very short and focused. So we did deliberately very much focus on what helped you. And then the follow-up questions were about, were there particular teachers or teaching styles that helped? Was there a particular assessment that helped, and various things like that? It didn't really get down to personal things. We did ask what people helped, and the most frequent one was family. People talked about family and the importance of having family support. But no, there wasn't anything in particular about. I think though in England there would be an easier way to identify somebody from a working class background through accent and so on. In Australia it's a bit harder to tell, and then the other difference I joked about was that lecturers are no longer God. They're a service provider or something equally awful. So I don't know that, it's so frequent that people would be inspired by lecturers. I'm not talking about anyone in this room, of course, I'm talking about other evil lecturers outside. Yes?
Do you, from the interviews that you did, have you done any sort of, I know you've done a little bit of comparison against students who weren't from low SES, but I just wonder if you have, in terms of not only finding out what's successful, but finding out what their actual challenges were, because they might not have been able to, we need to identify what the challenges are as well, and that's part of being a good teacher, is knowing not only those, basic bread and butter things that we all would hope try to do, but what are the special challenges that people from low SES backgrounds have, and what do we need to, look out for, do differently that we don't do for others?
No, we deliberately didn't. We deliberately took the success-focused approach for reasons of economy, and also because we thought if we go to the experts, the 2 sets of experts we consulted, putting the environmental scan, did I mention that? Aside, because we're going to look at expertise in a different way. The 2 groups of experts we looked at were successful low SES students, so they are experts at being low SES and succeeding, if you like, and then the expert teachers who have demonstrated success in teaching these students, and we asked them what helped. Because we assumed that what helps has helped overcome the barriers and challenges. Now we know that that excludes people who didn't make it beyond first year. We knew that, we talked about that when we designed the project. That's a different sort of set of research, and very hard to find those students for all kinds of practical reasons, and very delicate ethically to find people and say, why did you fail? So it was a very deliberate focus on, not on obstacles and challenges, but on what helped, with the assumption that if we did those things, and you said all those things we all do, we all don't do. Maybe everyone in this room does,
I
but
shouldn't say all, but I would hope, you know, a good deal of teachers do.
you would hope, but you would be sad if you if you knew the truth. I'm sorry. You know, a lot of, I mean, most teachers in higher education aren't trained teachers for a start. It's not their fault. You know, they're employed without the qualifications to do the job that they have to do, which is bizarre. So it was, you know, even if it is basic for people here, we were trying to do something that would actually have an impact across the sector, and that's not too hard. To see, for some of you, those things are so obvious, it's kind of like, is that all you've done? For other people, I've seen people read this book and go, I mean, the first one in here is effective teachers are approachable and available to guide student learning. Oh. Approachable. You know, what does that mean? Available. Interesting. I mean, I've had people sit there and go, interesting. Effective teachers are enthusiastic, dedicated, and have rapport with students. Rapport. Yeah, really. Interesting. How would you do that in a big class? You know, really. So it's basic information in one way. And I don't mean to mock our colleagues, but they're busy with other things and they're focused on other things and they're very good at other things. And they want to know what to do that's different. So basic information helps. So yeah, it was a very deliberate decision not to look at challenges. And it's a lovely research study. I mean, it's so positive.
But that said, I mean, they did emerge. The thing was, though, it was always about what had they done, what had worked to overcome.
Yes. In a discussion paper that's there at the back, Jade and I identified some of the characteristics of low SES students that are different, and some of those can be construed as challenges. Obviously, finance is one thing. We don't talk about that in the project much because I've noticed with senior people who make decisions and policymakers, that's often the, you know, we'll give them scholarships, right, next item on the agenda. And yes, give them scholarships, that's fantastic, but there's much more that needs to be done. It's much more subtle and nuanced. So, Phil.
Okay, so we give you $10 million to do something about this. How do you channel that money? Or if you control the purse strings, what do you do to change all of that?
I'll tell you what I would do. This is just a personal opinion. I would professionalise teaching in higher education in Australia. That's what I would do. I would make sure that every single person who's in front of the class knows how to teach and understands student learning at a tertiary level.
That doesn't make a good teacher.
They didn't do it properly. If I was in charge of the world.
It still doesn't make a good teacher. Just because they're trained in teaching doesn't make a good teacher.
Correct. But professionalising teaching is more than training. Professionalising teaching is putting a whole industry around it. Okay, so we complain a lot about teachers in Australia. I always say, my kids come home and complain about the teachers at school. They're all 4-year trained at university. They're selected through a selection process, you know, and we have, you know, those sponsored children in Africa who have teachers who are 12 years old and on a dirt floor, etc. You know, it's what you're used to and where your standards are. It's pretty good. In Australia, it's not bad, but I think it could be so much better. And I don't mean just initial training. I mean all kinds of stuff around professional development. I believe teaching, I'm going to promote now, I've got a podium. Teaching and learning is the most important thing that a university does. It's a cool business. Why don't we spend more money and more time and more effort on it instead of filtering around the edges? So you're right, of course it wouldn't fix it, but $10 million, I could get started. Have you got $10 million? Who wants to help? Yeah.
Can I ask another little question? Yeah. As a first-in family, you mentioned the postcode thing. Do you think there's a difference between, because I'm first-in family from a wealthy background, not low SES, is there a difference? Did you need to speak to people in the other postcode?
Yeah, I know what you're getting at. Well, Juliana touched on it, we didn't have time to go into detail. The conceptual framework we used for the project was about bridging socio-cultural incongruity. So, yeah, I'll break that down for you. So it's not about financials, it's about socio-cultural things, just to keep it simple. And so universities have a particular socio-cultural way of doing things, and people from low SES backgrounds have a different socio-cultural way of doing things. And we're about bridging the two. I'm not saying one's better than the other, or people need to step up or anything like that. It's about, that's what we're talking about, bringing in the differences, bringing them together in a kind of bridging way. So the postcode is a very flawed method of determining someone's socio-cultural background, but that's the method the government currently uses. They're changing it, but that's the one that was in play when we designed and applied for the funding and started the project. So we added the second one of being the first in family, because if you're the first in your generation to go to university, you have less sociocultural knowledge of how universities work.
Yes, you don't know the lingo.
You don't know the lingo.
Processes.
Exactly, and that's what it's about. So a lot of what we've done, and Jade and I have written, one of the papers we've written is about teaching the discourse. Teaching, and another thing we mentioned there was speaking in English.
Yes.
Making it accessible in a classroom basis, on a day-to-day basis, so it's not complete gobbledygook and, the processes we have in university. And we all know, we all stand around at morning and afternoon tea talking about the restructures behind our hand, and people keep coming to us at a private conversation, yeah, we'll be finished in a minute, and what about who got shafted and all that. That's all normal to us. But to a student coming into their version of that, which because they don't know about the politics, but the way in which we do things in universities, it's bizarre. So this project is about making that accessible, explaining the discourse. So it's about socio-cultural differences. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Kind of, sort of. Yeah.
Sort of.
Melody.
I was just wondering if Deakin has a well-embedded inclusive practice policy, and whether you're finding synergies between that and the outcomes from the project that you're working on, because as you know, our history on the CATS project, the principals are singing loud as inclusive practice one. So
Yeah, every single policy in the university has just been rewritten, and I haven't caught up with the email this week with what's happening with inclusive policy. I don't want to say this, but it's sort of true. My experience of it has been that no one knows it, no one takes any notice of it, and my approach has been, I rewrote the assessment policy and led the redevelopment of that, because that's the one that really counts, and if you can get stuff in there, that's the one new academics have to read to work out what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do. But having a policy on inclusivity sort of sitting out there is of limited usefulness, I think. You're preaching to the converted, and the converted don't need converted, they're already doing it, it's the masses. So I think the more core policies are critical as well. But yeah, Deakin isn't the light, shining light on inclusivity policy and practice integration. Can I put it that way? Yeah. Yes. I think we're probably out of time, aren't we? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And if you want to join the environmental scan, or the friends of the mailing list, there's no pressure.